I'm very interested to see where our conversation is going. Marin and Nelly are jointly presenting in April at 10X. I'm looking forward to that. Karandeep, I don't know if you were able to make that transcontinental trip over for April 11, 12, and 13, but I'm eager to hear what you have to say today. So please help us understand what's wrong with our QMS systems.
Sure. Let me just share my screen and let's see where we are. Right. Right. Is that visible for everybody?
It is.
Perfect.
Brilliant.
So today I'm going to be talking about the common mistakes that are made with the quality management system that I see as a quality and regulatory consultant. So effectively, what are the common issues that I see on a daily basis? And the best piece of advice is how effectively do you avoid these particular issues?
Okay.
So in terms of an overview, I'm going to be talking about the common quality management system issues, like I said, and how to avoid them. So what are the main ones that I see? They are software validation, which is number one. Supplier evaluation, what are the types of suppliers that people often miss out in terms of their supplier evaluation? Clear procedures. This is a very important one. Write what you do and do what you write. So I'm going to be talking about that later on. Internal audits. When people are conducting internal audits, they are not remaining independent. So they are conducting audits on themselves. CAPAS, that's a very interesting one. So the biggest root cause of FDA 483s and ISO 13485 non-conformities is often around CAPAS. And why is that the case? Where companies are not having the proper root cause analysis in place. And then, of course, I'm going to be talking about the ones that are quite exclusive to software as a medical device companies. So software as a medical device is something that's fairly new and a lot of companies are making mistakes. But I'm going to be covering that today too. And of course, miscellaneous issues. So number one, software validation. What software is in scope of a quality management system? So what exactly do I mean by software validation? Is the software able to do the job that you want it to do consistently and provide the results that you need? So effectively, in terms of what is in scope of a quality management system when it comes to software is the software involved or does it have an impact on the quality management system? Now, many companies are very good when it comes to this. They validate their purchasing software, they validate their production relating software, but they often miss out on the following. Number one, complaints portals. So a lot of companies are using cloud-based online forms such as MISA forms. They may be using customer support systems such as Zendesk, social media, or something that's feeding into a Trello board. I'm going to tell you a very interesting story about this. I had a client of mine who told me that, okay, currently that we have a complaints portal. Somebody comes into our online website, they feed into a form, which is via MISA form, that feeds into a Trello board, and then we deal with that. I say, okay, great. What I did between that call is I said, you know what, I'm going to set up a mystery shopping here. I'm going to put in a fake complaint and see if this client gets it. The next time I had the call with that particular client, I said to them, hey guys, how are you doing? Go great. I said, do you have any complaints? And said, no, currently we've had no complaints. I go, oh, well, hold on a minute. 2 days ago, I put in a complaint. Why did that not go through your system? And they immediately clicked and they understood the importance of software validation. So I said, the reason that you don't have any complaints is simply because you haven't validated your software and those complaints ain't coming through. It's not that you don't have any complaints. It's effectively that you're not capturing them because you've not validated your software properly. So that was the importance of it. Another thing as well, file sharing systems, if you're using things like SharePoint, G Drive, etc., you need to validate that you can access that system on time. Number two as well is effectively, you need to make sure that the right people can have access to that system. So what I'm trying to say here is, if you have file sharing systems, you want everyone in the company to have access to the approved documents. But you don't want everyone in the company to have access to the draft documents. You don't want people going into the draft documents and making edits that you don't really want happening. So what you need to do is basically make sure that the right people have access to approved documents. You want to make sure that the right people have access to the draft documents, etc. Another one is internet hosting as well, especially if you're a software medical device company. You're going to be using things like GitHub, you're going to be using things like AWS, Circle CI, etc. effectively. You want to make sure that the right people have access to that. And another point I'm going to make to that as well, if we live in a digital world and you access things basically online, you want to make sure that people have a access that's required. You also want to make sure they have a backup for your backup system. So I don't know if you guys remember, but basically Google had an outage back in August 2020. I'm not sure if everyone remembers that. If you're in the middle of an audit and you have an outage, you cannot say to the auditor, oh, sorry, we've got an internet outage and I can't provide XYZ procedure for you. Immediately, you're going to fail that audit as and when. Number two as well, if there's any risk of your systems being hacked, you want to make sure that you have multi-factor authentication as well. And what I say to companies, well, this is very important that you do this, is that you have some form of register in place where you have your software that's in scope of the quality management system and out of scope of the quality management system, and the justification of why that may be the case. Because if an auditor asks you, okay, great, I personally believe this software is in scope or out of scope, can you please provide me the justification for that? You've got that system in place effectively. So the next one is supplier evaluation. So suppliers can be broken down into two different categories. You've got your traditional product suppliers, maybe that's components or anything like that. And then you've got your service suppliers, basically. So what I was basically saying, things like your GitHub, your SharePoint, your G Drive, they're effectively service suppliers. This is the biggest one that I find, where companies bring me on as a quality and regulatory consultant. I say to them, have you conducted a supplier evaluation as me as an individual? And they say, why? I'll say, I'm supplying you a service that's integral to your quality management system, correct? I may be conducting an internal audit on you, but how exactly do you know that I'm even qualified to do this job? How do you know that I'm even competent to do this job? So I'm a supplier of services. You should be checking my credentials. You should be looking at my resume. You should be looking at my qualifications, etc., to make sure that I'm able to do this job. Number two, file sharing services. If you're using things like SharePoint, G Drive, Dropbox, etc., these companies are suppliers of a service to you, so you need to make sure that you've got that in place. Notified and approved bodies. This is one that people don't get. If you're using a notified or approved body to give you CE marking or ISO 13485 certification, you need to make sure that these companies effectively are doing their job properly. You need to make sure there's onboarding and they're able to do that. And of course, internet hosting, like I was saying earlier, if you use things like GitHub and Amazon AWS, you need to make sure that these companies basically are able to supply you the services that they need to do. So what companies often say to me, okay, great, if I'm using the giants like SharePoint, Google, Dropbox, etc., this isn't like a traditional, OEM company that maybe I can go to their premises and have like a tailored supply quality agreement. I'll say, okay, you know what, fine. But when you onboard these companies, you've got terms and conditions, you've got service user agreements, you've got SLAs, etc. What you can do in that case is derive a supply quality agreement from the information that they give you. What's going to happen when they have downtime? What's going to happen when they change something? What's going to happen when they change their features? And you can effectively create a supply quality agreement, because a lot of companies don't know this. And I discovered this quite recently. GitHub, and I've got nothing against GitHub. GitHub can revoke your access at any given time and not give you a reason. What are you going to do when you wake up tomorrow and you have a software medical device company, or maybe a software component to your medical device, and GitHub has revoked your access? That's something that you need to manage within your supply quality agreement and do something for. So you need to mitigate that risk one way or another. Another one.
Actually, before you do,
Sure.
What I thought was a comment, just a joke from Luke. I'm not so sure anymore. What did you mean when you typed what you said in the chat box, Luke? You said, great, let's go.
Yeah, great. We're gonna, DECRA is our service supplier, so we're gonna audit DECRA. Or do we
that joke goes over my head. I don't get it.
Yeah,
DECRA
Joe,
is our
I'm
notified
quite happy
body.
to explain that. So DECRA is a notified body. I mean, in
Right.
that position, you can't exactly go in and audit DECRA. But when you have DECRA as a notified body and you basically have them, you're going to have terms and conditions, you're going to have contracts that you signed with them. So what you can do in that particular case, you can create effectively a supply quality agreement that's derived from those terms and conditions. So when it comes down to that, you can't necessarily audit each and every supplier that you have. So what Luke is basically trying to say, just as a joke, that we can't audit DECRA, but what we can do is through the terms and conditions, we can create some form of supply quality agreement. Because when DECRA is going to come and audit you, they're going to say, okay, great, where's your supplier list? DECRA want to see themselves on that supplier list. They want to see that you've done a supplier evaluation on them to make sure that they're adequate to do the job. And that's basically what Luke is alluding to. And
Thank you,
Luke,
Maureen.
correct me if I'm wrong.
Maureen?
I just wanted to make a comment that supplier evaluation in a more general sense means that you're identifying what your company needs are for that supplier, and does that supplier meet it or not. So an audit is one way of doing that, but as Karandeep is saying, there's other ways as well, and one of the very easy ways is just to make sure your notified body certifications are up to date. So go and pull their certification and say, yes, this is why they're qualified, is because they've got the certification. So audit's a great tool and a supplier agreement is a great tool, but they're not the only tools for doing supplier evaluation.
Nellie?
So another thing that to consider also is that, and this is when I'm dealing with one of my other clients, is they have a lot of doctors that are consultants, but there's the Sunshine Act as well. So technically, I'm not going to maintain their supplier file. The legal department will, but I still need them on my ASL pointing to the legal department. And a lot of people forget about doctors. It's actually so, and the other thing about the supplier thing is I have found with suppliers that people make it too complicated. And what I mean by that is that they have a qualification form and then they make a requirement that you have to do an annual review and an update of that. And then you have to do this and this and this. And when I asked an FDA auditor who was retiring what was the #1 nonconformance in supplier, she goes, people don't follow their process for annual renewal of their quality agreement. And I'm all, she goes, you don't need it. There's no need for it. She goes, create a review process as your business needs and you've now satisfied it and you're not creating an admin nightmare. So, I mean, those are just, I mean, supplier, there's a lot of it. You could literally have a whole hour discussion on suppliers alone.
Kevin?
No, I just wanted to add on there. I mean, what I've seen on the supplier end, I've had customers really box themselves in, and this comes from the pharma perspective where I'm supplying APIs and things like that. But I have, customers that really paint themselves into a corner, basically by putting things into the quality system or the quality agreement that doesn't need to be there. So, I've had multiple instances where people put in for an API, that there's an expiration date instead of retest. And the minute you write expiration, you can't retest it and use it, even if it's still good, and those sorts of things. And then just going to Karandeep's comment beginning, or his bullet point there, as far as CAPAS, the other part of that is kind of before you have a problem. I've seen a lot of people make mistakes really in risk assessment. Any instance where I've had a problem on quality, where people are following the quality system. I mean, obviously you're gonna have problems if you don't follow it, but when you're following the quality system, a lot of the failure points come from a bad risk assessment upfront, and you don't put something in that quality system to begin with because you didn't identify risk.
I say it many times, I have to do it again here. I love you guys because in the last 5 minutes, we just talked together. 5 people contributed to this conversation and it was fluid and it was just us talking. I really, really appreciate you. And I really hope you can all come in April. If there's anything that's keeping you, if it's financial or something, let me know because this is our family and I want everyone to get together. There. Karandeep, it's back to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, guys. I love the fact that you're questioning me, and it's good to see conversation like that. So following on from supplier evaluation, the next one is clear procedures. My argument, what I say to people is let the people who are conducting the activities write the procedures and then give it to quality and regulatory to see if it's compliant, not the other way around. So what are the mistakes? What I see effectively is #1, paraphrasing the standards and regulations. Often I come across companies where they just have a procedure and they just paraphrasing ISO 13485 or CFR 820, but they're not very clear in terms of who is going to be conducting the procedure, when are they going to be conducting it, and how exactly are they going to record that. So what do I mean by that? Think who, what, where, when, and why. That's what it comes down to, procedure. There's one thing about being compliant, and there's one thing about how exactly within a company, how you go about doing the procedure. And you want to meet that in the middle. #2, procedures tied to specific roles. So they say, okay, the quality manager is going to do this. Okay, great. What are you going to do when that quality manager is off on holiday? What are you going to do when that quality manager is long-term sick? Does that mean that you can't do this procedure? So my argument with that is always have a procedure in place that allows for the delegation of tasks. But if you are going to delegate tasks, make sure that particular person that you're delegating it to is trained and is competent in that specific task. #3, using complicated words or terminology effectively. If you've got someone who's basically just working on a workshop floor, if you talk to a traditional medical device manufacturer, write it in the language that that operator understands. If you're going to write it in a language that that particular operator doesn't understand it, they're not going to follow that particular procedure. Leave the super detailed terminology and complex terminologies effectively for the process that require more skill stuff. So things like your design controls, your risk management, etc., where someone's sort of super, competent within quality and regulatory, leave that complex terminology for those people. And #4, again, is repeating what's stated in other procedures. If you've got a procedure that's basically paraphrasing that's already in another procedure, don't waste your time. Effectively reference back to it. So if you've got a procedure in place, let's say, for example, corrective and preventive action, a CAPA one, don't basically repeat what you've already got in your customer complaints. Just point back to it. So, refer back to customer complaint section 4 or section 5. That's the best way of going about it. There's no point repeating that effectively again, because what you're going to be doing by that is the moment you change your customer complaint procedure, you're then going to have to go into your CAPA procedure and change that all over again. So just signpost. There's completely nothing wrong with that at all. And this is another interesting one now, internal audits. So auditors are required to be independent. It does not mean that they have to be external. A lot of companies make that mistake. So what I'm trying to say to you basically is quality can audit human resources can audit quality. But you can't audit the work that you've done yourself. If you've done something yourself, how on earth can you audit yourself? That's not completely independent. So how exactly do you deal with this? Number one, use people from other departments. Like I said, if you're a quality and regulatory department, use people from human resources, use people from maybe R&D, use people from manufacturing to come and audit you, and vice versa effectively. The other way around it, and this is what I really recommend for companies, is use external consultants. I'm not trying to sell myself effectively here, but use external consultants in the fact that these people are coming in, they're seeing your company for the first time, they're seeing it from a different viewpoint, and they may spot something that you're effectively not seeing. And this is another important thing that I'm seeing quite a lot now. Some notified bodies or approved bodies in the UK, which is the terminology, are asking for certifications for auditors. What do I mean by that? So I had this issue myself where I've said to notified bodies, hey, for X amount of years in auditing, they said, nope, we want to see a certification to show that you can be an auditor. So effectively what I had to do is I have to go out at minimum and do an internal auditor course for ISO 13485. Now, if you are going to do an auditor course, make sure it's CQR or IRCA certified effectively. Nelly, I can see you have a question. You want to bring it up?
Actually, one of the things for the independents that I've actually started writing into all of my reports is I actually have a section in the report before you get into it that says, here's my auditor, here is their experience and qualification, and if they have certifications. And on top of that, I've actually designed an auditor training course. And so I actually describe that in my procedure. And what it means is anybody who's in training to be an auditor through the company has to be under a lead auditor who's already certified. And that'll say it right on the cover. And auditors have really liked that, because then they're like, oh, you've got it all here. And then you say they're in the supplier folder, they go to the supplier folder, then they're done. Whereas a lot of companies won't do that. And you're digging in and you're asking the HR person where the certs are, and it creates a mess. And I think that's been a nice, clean way of doing it.
Agree with that, Nelly. Maren, I believe you had a question too.
It wasn't a question. It was just confirming that I've had the same experience. And it's been true not only for ISO 13485, but when I've done ISO 9001 audits, I'm now getting asked for, and it's not a what's your auditor certification, it's show me the certification for your auditors from some type of training. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the ISO training, but they are looking for some type of external training and certification. Again, I've seen that more on 9001 than 13485, but I've experienced the same thing. So I got mine.
I've actually had it with the FDA too. They've actually dug into it as well, asking for qualification and certs.
Perfect. So the next one, corrective and preventive action. One of the main causes of FDA 483s are usually related to CAPAs. So effectively, what I'm trying to say, what is a CAPA? It's either a corrective action or preventive action. So what are the issues that companies have effectively? They are confusing the three terms. There's corrections, there's corrective actions, and there's preventive actions. And companies are often confusing the three. What is a correction? A correction is the immediate action that you take to fix the issue. A corrective action is effectively the more longer term things that you do trying to fix that issue. And a preventive action is basically the action that you take before an issue has even occurred. That's what you do. So you try and predict an issue that's going to happen. Maybe you're reading a journal and you maybe find a similar medical device that's had a particular mode of failure. And you say, you know what, guys, we're going to implement something in a company to prevent that same issue happening with us. Companies often confuse those things. Number two, of course, is a proper root cause analysis. I mean, all the quality and regulatory guys here, what the most common thing we say, human error. That is not a root cause analysis. Agree, the error may be human error, but why did that happen? Was it that, effectively top management didn't allocate the adequate resources? Is it that the people weren't trained particularly is it maybe that the people didn't understand what these terms meant effectively? So you want to use a proper root cause analysis to use. The most common one, of course, is 5 whys, Ishikawa, FMEA, effectively. Number 3, opening a CAPA for every single nonconformity. If you open a CAPA for every nonconformity, you are going to be there every day of your life trying to resolve that issue. Some nonconformities are so simple that you can fix them effectively in a matter of minutes. You know, you don't need to have a CAPA for it. Again, there are some issues that maybe take weeks or months or maybe even years to fix. Yes, in that case, open a CAPA, but you don't need to open a CAPA for every single nonconformity. Number 4, closing a CAPA too soon. If you have a corrective action in place or a preventive action in place, you need to maybe wait weeks, months, or in some cases even a year to make sure that whatever you've put in place is verified and validated. Otherwise, that issue is going to reoccur again. And number 5, having too many or too few CAPAs. If you have too many CAPAs, it means that your processes are not very good in place. If you have too few CAPAs, that means you are not identifying issues before they become apparent, or effectively you're not identifying issues when they become apparent. And I think the definitions here, like I said earlier, effectively, a corrective action is basically
this one.
Sure.
I'm thinking of probably the wrong way to think about it, but that CAPAs are like somewhat of a black mark on your record, that you failed somehow and you need to correct it. Now, I understand the P is preventative, that's fine. But if you are evaluating someone, you're like, how many open CAPAs do you have? And it's a big number. That would give me pause. You say, open one for every nonconformity and don't close it too soon. It sounds to me as though that CAPA number could get quite high.
Yes, Joe, I agree with you, but it all depends on what is the cause of that CAPA. And of course, number 2 is how you're dealing with it effectively. So the number of CAPAs doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing something wrong or it's necessarily bad. It's just basically how you're dealing with it as basically how you go about it. Maren and David, I can see you have
I'm sure they have comments.
This.
Yeah, go ahead, Maren. If you want to go, I'll go next. Yeah.
So there's a lot on CAPA. What I will say is I think it's important to try to identify issues earlier. So I tend to think of CAPA as a complete system where you have what I call listening posts at lower levels in the organization. And the goal is to identify the issues, identify when they're trending before they become a nonconformity. And I think if you take that approach, that gives you a chance to fix those things before they're nonconformities, which means that you can limit the number of CAPAs you have. You're essentially looking earlier to find when something may happen. I think it's also important to use the terminology. You don't close a CAPA, but I often will use the terminology that you've completed the CAPA when you're in that phase of waiting for the verification or the validation, that basically the effectiveness check. So I think there's language you can use around how you set up your system to help address Joe's concern with, I've got too many CAPAs, because you want to be able to deal with the issues appropriately in the organization and raise them early without having all of the issue correction in your CAPA system.
Yeah, and so I was just going to say, notified bodies and regulatory bodies around the world, they really do expect to see CAPAs in an organization. Their expectation is not that everyone's doing everything perfectly. So it's not. So I sort of spin it like if you have these CAPAs that are open, it's sort of an indication that your quality system is working. Now, Karandeep was mentioning something about depends on the types of CAPAs you have, because a lot of times it may not have been corrected and they've got repeat incidences going on, and that's unacceptable. But so I was just gonna make that one comment about, it really is an indication that your quality system is working when you have evidence of things you're finding along the way. But to my question really to Karandeep and others were the 5 whys is a great way to start, when you're trying to do root cause analysis. But my question is, for provocative discussion, would be, do you just do it once, or do you have discussions around the event and then set off a new 5 why, based upon what the discussion has led to? So do you just do it once, or do you do it one or more than one time, depending on the discussions that occur about the event?
So
I have my-
David, my answer to that is I personally do it more than once, because as you're going through the CAPA, you discover new evidence, you discover new opinions on things.
Yeah.
It may be that your perspective changed. So, don't be afraid to do one. And this is what auditors love. The fact that, you're gathering evidence and maybe you challenge your opinions, you maybe discover something new. That's what auditors want to see, the records that you have in these discussions. Like what I said, every auditor was asked this, Karandeep, please show me your records. And the moment they see that you're challenging your ideas and changing your opinion on things, auditors absolutely love that. So I agree with you, use it more than once.
Yeah, good.
I've had problems too where they have said it that you have to have a resolution for a CAPA, and sometimes you can't because of circumstances and reasons and stuff. And I don't think I should have to spend 3 months to explain why I can't resolve a CAPA that occurred because situations changed and you can't repeat it and figure it out. So that's something to watch out for too in CAPAs.
I've actually closed. So actually, everybody's made great points. So I'm just going to hit on one, Jan. I've actually closed many a CAPA that you couldn't do anything with, and we just said we're going to continue to monitor it. And if the issue repeats, then we'll reissue a new CAPA. But that's after like a lot of investigation, and you can see the investigation trail. The other thing to add to your correction versus corrective action versus preventive action is containment. All my CAPA forms now have very clear selections. Are you doing containment, corrective action, or preventive action? And the thing that everybody gets confused, I can't tell you how many times I've had this discussion. They'll want to put a preventive action in a non-conformance, and I'm like, you can't do that. The event has already occurred. People do not understand preventive action at all. So I spend a ton of time, and at first it starts as a conversation, then it gets to a lecture. So a ton of time there. The other thing on the investigation is I have found I get a lot of newbie CAPA people who just have no clue. So I actually designed an investigation form that's very much like a fish diagram, but it has sections, and it says, okay, employee qualification, you're going to go look here, document what you did here. You're going to look at equipment, and I have them go through it. If the section's not applicable, then they just put NA and say, hey, it's not applicable and here's why. And then I use 5 whys to verify that I actually got a good root cause if I need to on a detailed investigation where it's not obvious. But that's kind of the methodology I use for investigations. There, I think I covered everybody's point. Sorry.
We have a comment from Ramald, who I've invited on, but he's feeling ill, so I'll read for you. Now the MDR defines corrective action wrong. How to understand this change in the context of correction action and preventative action. Do you follow? Karandeep, he's saying that
Ramald,
way
if
that
you want to
MDR
message me
defines action.
directly where this is incorrect, I can discuss with you offline, but I've not spotted this issue myself. Yeah, if you spotted this, please feel free to contact me and we can discuss it.
Okay. Thanks, please continue.
Perfect. And that was it, really. So we're at the end of it. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. I realize I put my wrong email address there, but not a problem. So effectively, yeah, you can follow me on LinkedIn. You can follow me on YouTube. You can subscribe to my podcast. And that's it, basically. So I'd open the floor to any questions that anybody has.
Tell me about your podcast. You've really taken off with that. It's also
Yeah, effectively.
really
So
familiar to the name that Dwayne's using for the MedTech Project MedTech. So I guess they all get a little confusing.
Yep, I know Dwayne very well. So yeah, effectively, I run a podcast called the MedTech Podcast, where I interview people within different forms of MedTech. And the reason I started the podcast, number one, is I want to know what's happening in the industry. What are the different types of devices out there? What are the different types of technology out there? So effectively, what I like in the MedTech Podcast is it just happens to be a conversation that I happen to have with a professional, and I share that with individuals out there so they learn what's happening effectively. So the reason I started that podcast, of course, is number one, is to learn what's happening in the industry. And of course, number two is to share that with anybody out there who is basically interested in learning about MedTech itself.
I could think of a few people on this call who might make for interesting guests.
Definitely. If anybody's interested in coming on a podcast, feel free to reach out to me.
Lovely. We were if you go back a couple of slides, or actually, I don't know that you need slides for this, so we'll just talk as a gallery. You were talking about suppliers and points of failure and audits and the like, and some things can come out that are really unexpected. So I I have my IT in place and I use really long, complex passwords, and I'm, really assiduous about all of that. And last week, Russia came calling for me. I don't know how, but Russia, because he traced down exactly, they somehow compromised my Cloudflare account and put malicious code in everywhere and took down Medical Marcom, Medical Devices Group, my conference site, my personal site, and a client site.
Oh, no.
And it was Jorg and Rick who were like, I'm getting this message. Yeah, you were getting a message that said, welcome to Russia, basically. And I was talking to my guy who's, a security expert, and he said, I've never seen anything like what's going on now. He said that from time to time, Russia and the United States would, give up certain hackers as the time kind of thing. He said after the Ukraine war started, it's all out cyber warfare. It's like an invitation to just attack as many US companies as you can. And you would think that, hey, it's just me. I mean, who's even going to bother? Medical Marcom. I mean, what? Didn't matter. So I was thinking about that in the context of, if you're in an audit in GitHub or Google, I'm like, I don't even know where to go to, because the hacking and the attacks become more and more sophisticated. I don't know if you have a perspective from a quality management system about these type of extraordinary events.
So yeah, my view is if you're using these things like online systems, have multi-factor authentication in place, have, strong passwords in place. Because if you're in the middle of an audit, an auditor says, okay, great, can you show me in GitHub where you have X, Y, Z? You can't turn around and say, oh, sorry, I've been hacked. Or, oh, sorry, my password doesn't work. Immediately, you're going to fail the audit effectively. So you need to make sure that you've got the right measures in place. And number two, even if you can't get access to that system, the auditor's going to turn around and say, okay, great, what's your backup? Oh, GitHub does backups itself. No, you can't have that. You need to have something in place where you're manually downloading maybe every week or maybe every single few days, getting that information in place, because a lot of people may remember here is, I believe it was around August 2020 when Google Drive had a big outage. If you're in the middle of an audit, you can't just say to the auditor, hey, sorry, Google's out of place, I can't get these documentation in place for you. Immediately, you're going to fail the audit. So
Well,
you
let
need
me
to have
ask
a
you that.
backup for your backup.
The auditor is a reasonable human being as well. It's like, wow, that is extraordinary. All right, let's get back in 3 days. Sounds like a more reasonable answer when Google's back up, as opposed to, sorry, you failed.
I agree with you, Joe, but auditors only have so much time. So they've allocated XYZ days for your audit, but to say that they're available in 3 days again, I think that's quite unlikely. The auditor may say, okay, great, I understand that your documentation is not there, but the auditor is going to challenge you immediately. So what does that mean? That you can't get access to your documentation, that
Well,
your
I have to
whole
imagine that,
company
I
shuts
don't know
down?
how it works, but wouldn't an auditor have like 2 or 3 things they're working on at a time and say, okay, let me go take care of Nellie and Luke's questions, and then I'll come back to your audit because, Google's back up? I don't know.
Generally, the way it works, Joe, is an auditor will allocate, okay, I'm going to work with 2 days with company X, then I'm going to go the next 3 days with company Y and then company Z. But to say when they're going to be available for you again, no one really knows.
But
Luke?
you have a disaster recovery plan that says I can restore my data within 24 hours. They're going to be respectful of that. So my suggestion is in your quality plan for your site to say my disaster recovery plan is this, and I can recover my data, because my data is stored for all my clients is stored in a small hard drive offsite in a fireproof safe. So I have to contact that person who could restore it in 24 hours.
By the way,
Agreed, Nelly, but
my,
how many companies can do that? They say that they can store it within 24 hours, but how many actually can?
Well, I don't care about other companies. I care about that I can do it, and I know I can do it.
Yeah.
I
By the
don't
way,
break my procedure if I can't do it. So let's put it that way.
I'm going to just show my screen here and I think I am effectively that.
Yep.
While I got it back up, Google now is caught on to the fact that I got hacked last week and are warning people that my site is dangerous, even though I've since corrected these things. So now we're putting in these requests that say, can you go check again? Because we fixed the thing. But to get to the screen, you have to go past this bright red screen that says, danger, danger, Will Robinson, don't click here or you're going to be in trouble. And I came here and I'm like, I got through it and it's like, no, you're in danger. So at the risk of completely ruining all my files, I'm showing you that our agenda has come together quite nicely. I have a few spots open for Thursday, but just another point about how complex it can be and how far-reaching the implications. Luke?
I have a question on your procedures slide. Like you say that the who and the what and everything else must be known. And in my experience here and in other companies, it's always the last that's failing. That's the why. So whenever you want to change something, you're not sure if you're allowed to change because you don't know why it's there in the first place. And it's not only with procedures, it's also with other documentations in the risk management file, in the device history file. So the design history file, it's everywhere. It's always the why that's failing. Is that also your experience?
Very much so, Luke. Is what I come to companies as I come on as a consultant, I always argue that the first thing I want to do with them is have an induction with them is what the hell is this quality stuff? What are the regulations? What are the standards that we have to follow? And why do we have to follow them? Because a lot of companies say, oh, you've got XYZ procedures. They think we're just trying to be a pain. But they don't realize these things are requirements. And that's what it is really. It comes down to education. They need to understand why we are doing these things.
But it's also the other way around, that they're doing too much because they don't know they don't have to do it.
Yeah, I agree. It does happen. Some companies are reading the standards and the regulations, are doing things that are not required. But again, it comes down to education again, whereas they don't have the required expertise to understand what is required and what isn't required. So yeah, my argument again here is it comes down to lack of education.
Yes. Thank you.
Nelly had her hand raised, but she's jumped off for a second. Anyone else? Nelly has returned. Did you have a comment still?
No, I just wanted to say excellent conversation. I really love it when you get this much dialogue around quality because everybody does things a little different. And when you get together and talk about these subjects, you kind of might learn something new or you challenge your current thought process. So I really appreciate it.
Have you and Maren, you may have written this yesterday. I didn't have a chance to really evaluate it. Have you and Nelly come up with the angle for your talk?
She's giving me her slide deck. I'm going to be updating it, and then we're going to meet hopefully next week, right, Maureen?
Yeah, and it's around the angle of, QMS is important, not because it's just a pain, but because it actually helps your business.
Yep.
Which I think is very similar to what Karandeep has been telling us today. So I think that will be the approach and the perspective is how do you make the quality management system make your business better?
Sue wrote that this is really timely for her. And I'd like to ask someone going through this right now. So if you come off mute, how are you approaching it? And you have the luxury of our shared network here where you have 3 or 4 experts talking about quality so you can critically evaluate. Where are you netting out on what's right for your small growing startup business?
Galero, my manufacturing and design company, is keeping good tabs on quality control and key KPIs. But I realized that I need to have my own system in place. So TEDCO is an agent that has given me provided advisors for free of charge, and they paid for $7,000 out of $9,000 for a quality control manual to be built for Cartech. So we're just finalizing that, and then we're working over with Galero, and we're going to combine everything together so that I have my own quality control system in place for Cartech. It's just, just at the forefront, just beginning. So I know it's a work in progress, but I realize that I need to get this in place before I submit to FDA. So we're starting. We've got the manual written, and we're just communicating with Galero right now to kind of move everything over or include Cartech into their quality control management system.
I'm intrigued. You said before we submit to FDA, I know you've had submissions. I know you have some coming. So for the team, where does all of this, can I submit a 510K without all of this ironed out?
I don't know, but I wouldn't want to submit a 510K until I figured out where the defects are and if there's, any type of risk. So
that's my question, because You have already submitted to FDA.
No,
You've never
not.
submitted to FDA?
nope.
Oh, I thought that because I didn't realize that I thought maybe for like version 1 or something that there was
We
some
have version 1, but we're also mitigating risk. So we took the time to kind of step back and reduce further risks before we submit. We're slated for Q2 of this year, and everything is a go, and it looks really good according to my last meeting. But this will be our first submission. And I did apply for the discount. So instead of paying $12,000 or whatever it is, we're paying $2,000.
Well done. Rick, we've not heard from you yet.
No, my field is really not quality control, quality regulation, regulatory, anything like that.
You're our design for manufacturing guy, and you're our guest next week.
Yes, and this presentation has actually given me an idea or two on some things I want to do for next week's presentation. But I really appreciate these talks because it sort of gives me the environment. It gives me a real good idea of the environment in which I work, which is not just the thing that you're doing, but also if this is if this process is like a river and the design is like the water, well, the regulatory quality systems and requirements are very often like the river bottom, the course of the river, the sandbars, the submerged trees, the things that you really need to know about to navigate. And so that's one of the other reasons why whenever I can, including this year, I attend 10X, because it's not just a bunch of designers. As a matter of fact, I'm probably a minority. Everybody's a minority because there's so many different disciplines represented. It gives me an idea of what's going on, and it gives me context. So that's the so someone like me tuning in on this is not because I'm directly involved in regulatory, but because regulatory is directly involved with me.
Thank you for that,
I
Marin.
totally concur with you, Rick.
How's that?
Thank you, Lou.
I totally concur with you. We're designers, but you want to know in which environments you have to design.
Marin?
So I'll just make a quick comment. If you're working at a medical company, you're working in quality. It may not have the quality title, but what Rick does for design for manufacturability and all of that, that's all part of quality. I actually wanted to go back to an earlier discussion because we were talking about the auditor and gee, why can't the auditor just give you a little bit of time and all of that? Auditors are under a tremendous amount of pressure these days, particularly if you're a certification auditor, because the criteria for their organization to become certified or to stay certified is much, much higher. There's actually regulatory requirements about having your data available. So the auditor doesn't necessarily have a lot of flexibility to say, oh, your documents are available, let me just come back later, because that could potentially be a regulatory finding, and it could potentially put their company at risk of losing their certification if they don't flag it. So I think it's always helpful when you're talking with any outside supplier, including a company that's auditing you for certification, to understand what their business criteria are as well, so you can be a better partner for them and understand where their pain points are. And we don't often talk about those other people, but I think anybody who's doing a regulatory audit, whether they're FDA or BSI or Intertech or whoever they are, it's a tough job. And I think it's helpful if we can show them that we understand it's a tough job and show them respect, and make sure we're partnering with them as best we can. And that comes out of my experience with being at Physio Control during their last consent decree and understanding that perhaps they didn't approach it completely in that vein.
Although, you know what I could do, Maureen, is I could always just have before an audit the hard drive FedEx to me where it's on site for the audit. So it's just there. It's like a preparation. That's an easy thing to do.
Yeah, there's a lot of mitigations you can do for that, including having paper copies as backup, or a local copy. There's other ways.
I'm going to reach out to each of you today, or you can catch me first, about coming in April. We're less than 3 months away, and I just put the link of the hotel there, so you can begin to look at the facility, which is new this year. Karandeep,
I am
thank you.
coming in April.
Yes, you are. In fact, I know that most of you are, but some I'm not entirely sure yet. I don't know about our friends across the pond, if you're going to be able to mix business with the conference, Karandeep, but we'd love to see you again. And Rick's our guest next week. Great conversation today. Thank you all for joining. Bye for now.